Good evening. Good evening. All right. It's so great to see so many big kids in the crowd today. And as I'm going first, I hope you all don't mind humoring me a little bit with a little bit of audience participation. By show of hands, how many of you have children? Okay. By show of hands, how many of you are currently or have ever been a child? If you don't have your hand up, I have some questions after the show. And then one last question. How many of you can honestly say that in your childhood or youth, an adult made a positive impact on your life, and because of them, you are the person you are today? Amazing. Josh Shipp, who is a teen expert and youth speaker, says that every kid is one positive adult away from being a success story. And I honestly believe that, because like many of you today who raise your hand, I too am here because of the positive impact that adults have made in my life, in my youth, and in my childhood. Whether it was Mrs. Nordman, my second grade teacher, who introduced me to poetry, and at my high school graduation gifted me with a rhyming dictionary that I still have to this day. Or Mrs. Mahalik, my middle school and high school teacher, English teacher, who took me to my very first professional stage play in Chicago, where to this day, A Midsummer Night's Dream is still my favorite Shakespeare play. I grew up about an hour away from here, on the outskirts of Gary, Indiana. My father worked in a steel mill most of his adult life up until a few years ago upon his retirement. And my mother was a stay-at-home mom well up until I was in high school to 6 children. My father, as you can imagine, takes a lot to provide for 8 people, often worked doubles, which means it was not uncommon for me to go days without seeing my dad. At some point, he had to sleep. So that meant that school became an extended part of my family, and therefore my teachers and my coaches also became an extended part of my family and made an impact on me. My mother is the oldest of 11 kids. My father is one of 9. As I mentioned, I'm one of 6. I have 14 amazing nieces and nephews. I have been surrounded by children my entire life. I literally have dozens of first cousins, many of which I began to babysit as early as 11 years old, when I was 11 years old. And if you would have asked me back then, I definitely was not interested and had no idea that I would want to work with kids. In fact, I have always wanted to be a writer. My degree is in writing. College is actually what brought me to the South Bend area. I graduated from St. Mary's College in 2004. Go Bells. There's a few in the crowd. Graduated in 2004. And it was in college that I found my calling. The summer between my junior and senior year, I received a research grant in partnership with a psychology professor. And our project was to study the high school Latino dropout rate in this community specifically. The professor was going to focus on the data, comparison with the rest of the state and the rest of the country, and my responsibility was really to get the stories of kids in the community and then to be able to share that story, in which I did it through poetry, as I mentioned, my degree was in writing. And I did a variety of interviews throughout the summer before my senior year. And one interview in particular really impacted my life. I interviewed a 16-year-old boy who was on the verge of dropping out or being kicked out. It really just depends on who you asked. And one of the questions I asked all the kids was, do you like to read, write, or draw? Any of those things. And he smiled in a very curious way to me and said, yes, I like to do all of those things. Now, I asked that question because I wanted to gauge where their interests lied and how that related to their motivation for school. But I was curious about his smile, so I said, what is so amusing about that question? And he gets up, he walks out the room, and he comes back with a small stack of photos, because back then we printed out pictures, and you couldn't just show them on your phone. And so I start flipping through the pictures, and then I too begin to smile, because I'm looking at what I can only describe as art. Spray painted on the side of abandoned buildings, but it was art, and he was talented. Those pictures allowed me to ask a series of other questions. And in that, I learned a few things. The first, yes, some of his teachers were very much aware of his talent. But because of how he displayed that talent, he was called a vandal and a thug. His mother was not aware of his talent because she was here as an undocumented immigrant, and he did not want to worry her with anything that could have legal implications. So she was not aware. He had been yelled at, chased, and even shot at when trespassing and doing his graffiti art. But he continued to take that risk because he told me, as he says, it's the only thing that I'm good at. So that made me think of a number of other things. How sometimes society, schools, and even our own families measure value and success in our kids if they don't check off certain boxes. We think of things like the kid who shows up to school every day, which he did not do, and he often showed up late because his mother went to work at 3 o'clock in the morning and he was responsible for getting his younger siblings to school. Or for getting good grades, which he did not do because he missed a lot of school, was late, fell asleep in class, or he was doodling, and so his grades did not reflect any of his talents. So I think about this, and I ask myself, what if one person had fostered that talent? And I don't know if you've driven through South Bend lately, but we are covered now with beautiful murals and artwork and beautiful street art, and I feel like his talent would definitely be appreciated today. I don't know where he's at anymore. I did learn that he eventually did drop out, and I lost track of him. It was a connection I had through somebody else, so I was never able to keep up with this child. When those interviews ended that summer, I wanted to do a project through my senior year, so I started an after-school tutoring and mentoring program at one of our local high schools. I had about 12 to 15 kids who were coming regularly, and then I enlisted the help of our Latina leadership group on campus, of which I was president my senior year. Because I don't know if you've been around teenagers, but 15 can be a lot. So I enlisted the help of some friends to really help me work with that. But ever since that project and ever since that interview, everything that I've done since then has led me to one of two things. It has led me to working with youth or working to make the community a better place for our youth. Thankfully, I currently get paid to do both. I currently work with the Boys and Girls Club of St. Joseph County as the Director of Mission Integration, but I started off as a club director for nearly 10 years running an after-school site on the city's west side, where my very first year I was averaging about 130 kids a day. In my current role, after making some changes and moving up, I currently oversee the 22 programs that we have in St. Joseph County. And we currently serve approximately 1,300 kids across St. Joseph County. And that seems like a pretty big number until I tell you the number 600, which is the number of kids that are on a wait list to get into one of our programs. But those numbers are relatively small when I say this number, 47,000. That is how many kids we have in St. Joe County between the ages of 5 and 18. So 1,300 kids, 600 on the wait list, 47,000, that's a drop in the bucket. Now, I'm sure many of these kids are involved in many other things, whether it's sports, clubs, church, camps, so many other opportunities for them to be involved, to be engaged, to be busy, for positive adults to enter their lives. But when you think of the number 47,000, without knowing what all these kids are involved in, it's very clear that there are gaps and that we have kids that are falling through the cracks. And one way that we can easily see this is through the current youth violence problem we have in our community. If you have been around for the last couple years, it's no secret that there is a youth violence problem in our community. And if you're ever feeling bold enough, brave enough, hop into the comment section one day on Facebook after a local news story about the latest shooting, assault, murder, anything that involves youth as the perpetrator or youth as the victim. And it's very disheartening to hear or see or read how people talk about our youth in the community. But not only that, how they talk about the community as a whole because of these stories. Many individuals who don't even live in our community, who are not coming with solutions on how to solve some of the issues we see in our community, who are not stepping up to tutor, to mentor, to donate, to use their voice to help solve the problems of our community. And the thing is youth violence does hit a little hard for me. I've lost 2 kids, former club kids, to gun violence in 2022 alone. 2 kids who I remember as first graders who I'll never get to see graduate. And we have a crisis in our community. We continue to lose money for mental health support and in our public schools, where the majority of our kids attend. Of course, we have a youth violence problem. If kids do not see value in their own lives, how can we expect them to see value in the lives of others? I'll say that one more time. If kids do not see value in themselves, how can we expect them to see value in others? And anytime there is a new local story, I scan it, top to bottom, left to right, and I'm looking for 2 things, one of which I hope I don't find, and that is the name of somebody else that I know. The second is the gaps. Where are the gaps? How can we fill them? Whether that's as an individual, as an organization, or as a community. Because one thing is clear, kids need more safe spaces. And I don't just mean that physically. They need positive adults to support, to encourage, to see value in them, and also to hold them accountable through relationship, respect, rapport. Not just when they are in elementary school, because I get it, kids are cute, and everyone wants to work with little kids. But where it's more important is our middle schoolers and our high schoolers, where things like peer pressure, increased independence, and a current mental health crisis opens up our youth to things like gangs, violence, substance use, and other forms of self-harm and self-sabotage. Kids need support and they need to feel valued, and only a person can make somebody else feel valued. So how do we do that? How do we fill the gaps? Everyone's heard the saying, it takes a village. But it's more than just a saying, it's a call to action. How can we, as individuals, as an organization, as a community, make an impact? Every day I see the collective ability of individuals to make an impact. I see it in the 24 of my former club kids who are now current club staff. I see it in the faces of kids and volunteers who show up every week consistently to read to kids, to engage with them, to talk with them, to listen with them. I see it in the face of the single parent who we were able to connect to a resource for their child or for themselves to receive therapeutic services the following week instead of waiting 4 to 6 months on a wait list. And that is actually a very big problem in our community right now, access to mental health services. So of course, we have problems in our community. We can do more. Everyone can step up because as I mentioned, right, every child, every kid is one positive adult away from being a success story. At the beginning of the talk today, most of you raised your hand to let me know that somebody poured that time and energy into you. So if you have the time, if you have the resources, if you have the voice, why wouldn't we put that into some of our most vulnerable people in the community? Because every kid is one positive adult away from being a success story. And all of you, you up there as well, And all of you already have everything it takes to be that one person. Thank you.